Nosfydda, croeso i'r sioe, gaeaf Cambrian Photography. Joel Dewey.
Dwi'n Paul Davis. Hello and welcome to the Cambrian Virtual Show. My name is Paul Davis.
And I'm Joel Longbone. Hello.
You're getting very good at that, Joel, I have to say.
Which bit? My name?
The name, yeah. Saying the right name.
Yeah. Hopefully my Welsh pronunciation was pretty good. Let me know in the comments if it wasn't, and I'll keep improving on it. So.
Indeed. A very quick apology to everyone. We are running 15 minutes late this evening. We did totally mine and Joel's fault, because we're supposed to come on these things 15 minutes before and speak to all the speakers about how to get ready. We totally ignored our own advice. We had a lovely conversation with Steve. And then 1 minute before we were supposed to go, we came across the technical problems that we should have solved before we went live. So we do apologize for that. Yeah. Thank you everyone for...
Yeah. Blame it on the amateurs.
Indeed. Thank you everyone for tuning in live. It's always lovely to see you here. Please let us know that you're watching live. Wave us a hello. Wave us a hello. That's a new one.
The emoji for this evening is either trees or mountains.
Okay. There's your little challenge, everyone. Find those trees or mountain
Which is only
emojis.
Possible on Facebook, apparently. Not on YouTube.
Yeah,
so.
Indeed. If you find a way to do it on YouTube, then crack on.
Let us know.
Indeed. Yeah, it would be nice. Yes. Are we streaming?
I think so. We've got a few people watching.
Okay, that's fine.
Why?
Yeah, no, I've got ticks. Yeah.
Okay.
No, I couldn't see the screen there. So.
Oh, there we go.
There we
Gary
go.
Neville has got a mountain emoji. Thank you, Gary. That's good.
That's lovely.
Yes, so we had a quick video earlier, didn't we? Talking about Mindshift and think tank bags, which was great. Great help from Helen. And then tomorrow we've got a concert from Nikon talking about the new Z series, the Mark II especially. And then we also have the great conversation between Jonathan Critchley and Paul Sanders. So definitely don't miss that one tomorrow.
Yeah, it's going to be an awesome day tomorrow. But it's going to be an awesome evening tonight as well, Joel.
Yeah,
because in a second, we'll be introducing our guest speaker, Steve Gosling. And he's going to give us a little talk. And we're also going to be doing some Q&As as well. So if you've got any questions during the talk, drop them into the comments and we'll get them to the end. So can we just quickly have a look at these comments, because we've got some
hi guys,
really
it's getting worried here. Sorry about that, Steve. Blame it on us too. Good emojis there. Pam's got I think that's a Christmas tree. Yeah, it looks like it's got lights or some sort of decoration on it. Oh, Sarah's watching because she's got her wavy hand emoji. And then we've got Steve with a lot of trees, a lot of cacti, a bunch of flowers, a grass, and some autumn leaves. Thank you, Steve. That'd make a great photograph.
Right, that's brilliant. I think it's time to introduce our guest speaker for this evening, Steve Gosling. Hi, Steve. How's it going?
Steve. Hi, guys. Good to see you. I just wanted to say, Paul, you said before you've got ticks. You know you can get a little plastic card remover for those things.
Was that off Dexter, Paul? Oh dear. Right, Paul will be off now. He'll have to spend another 5 minutes recomposing himself.
Yeah, sorry, you did warn me about that, didn't you?
Oh dear. So we're coming from Steve Gosling's brand new office.
Yes, apologies about there's bare walls behind, cardboard boxes and everything else that's all a bit bare, but we've only been in a month and I'm still unpacking boxes. So. And as everybody I'm sure will sympathise, my wife does not see the unpacking of boxes full of cameras and photographic kit as being the highest priority when we've still got frying pans and plates and knives and forks in boxes. So yeah, so apologies about the sort of bare surroundings that I look like I'm in a warehouse. I know. So
At least you don't sound like you're in a warehouse. The audio
That's good.
sounds good too.
That's good. I was worried I might sound like I was in a toilet, which is even worse than sounding like you're in a warehouse. So
that is very true. Oh dear. Oh, Helen Smith says hello and 2 dancing ladies. I don't know if that's supposed to be us, Paul.
Yeah, I think we've seen this before, and I think Helen, that's her little symbol for me and you, Joel. I think.
Oh dear. You don't want to see me dance. That'd be awful. Leave the dancing to my wife.
Oh, dearie me.
She's good at dancing. Right. Anyway, let's get started before Paul cries anymore with laughter. So, right, we'll put your presentation on.
Okay.
Paul and I will drop off, and I'll pop your presentation full screen, and we'll see you soon.
Cool. Okay. Well, tell me if there are any problems, guys. Welcome and thank you to everyone for signing up and for listening in this evening. Much appreciated. And I hope that everyone's managing to stay safe and well in the face of this virus that we've been suffering for many months now. I'm sure we're all looking forward to the time, I know I am, when I can get out with my camera unrestricted to wherever I want to go rather than being confined to certain locations. But it's, I guess, a sort of bit of a challenge to creativity to find photographs in places that I wouldn't normally go to. So hopefully what I'm going to say will give you something to ponder as you prepare for the day when you can go out unrestricted with your cameras. I'm going to spend the next 50 to 60 minutes talking about my thoughts on composition, particularly in respect of landscape photography. And as I do so, you'll see that I will show you some of my images. As the guys have said, if you have any questions, please send those in as I'm talking, and then we'll try and answer as many as possible at the end. Hopefully, you'll be pleased to hear I'm not going to bore you by talking about the rules of composition. You might be asking yourself why, and I guess that's a good question. On a talk on composition, why not talk about the rules? Well, firstly, there's so much information on the internet about the so-called rules of composition, the rule of thirds, the golden ratio, the origins in the Fibonacci sequence and the Fibonacci spiral, and etc., etc. I really don't want to waste your time covering that stuff. Search Google and you can have hours of fun, amazing time, reading all of that stuff. If you detected a note of sarcasm, you were correct. I'm sure that most of you are already familiar with the rule of thirds, which is one of the most commonly talked about compositional rules. You'll see its application in this image. The trunk of the tree is roughly on one of the thirds, and the main root structure here is approximately on one of the horizontal thirds. So you've got this sort of rule of thirds being applied here. But to be honest, it's not something that I do very regularly, as you will see as we go through. This particular image, for those that are interested, was taken on in my local woods. So one of these photographs taken not too far from home during lockdown on an infrared converted Olympus OMD, which I'm happy to talk about in more detail at the end if you want me to. So the most important reason that I'm not going to dwell on the rules is that I really want to encourage you to break them. Certainly learn the rules, understand them, experiment with using them, understand when they work, when they don't work, but certainly don't, in big capital letters, slavishly try and apply them to every photograph that you take, unless you want to end up with boring formulaic images. The so-called rules, I consider them to be guidelines only. Think of them as hints or tips, not as the highway code of photography. They won't work for all subjects in all situations, so actively seeking out images that conform to the rules and dismissing those that don't is definitely not recommended. It's better, I think, to learn to trust a combination of your own instincts and intuition to inform your compositional judgments. So let me just talk a little bit about this particular photograph. It was taken not too far actually from where I live at the moment, and I photographed this tree many times over the years. You get some incredible skies behind it. It sits on a little mound. It's not really I call it the tree on the hill, but it's not really on a hill. It's a bit more of a hummock, really, I guess. But you get these amazing cloud structures, and often when I go there I look up at the clouds and I just feel overwhelmed by the sky. It makes me feel so insignificant on the surface of the planet. So I use this tree as a metaphor for me. It's an obvious focal point. It makes it more interesting than just photographing the sky on itself, on its own, but the tree really is a metaphor for me. The size of the tree, the positioning in the frame is a reflection. It's a compositional judgment made because that reflects how I was feeling underneath this particular sky. Like the sky was overwhelming me, like it's trying to push the tree out of that photograph. That's how I felt overwhelmed by the sky on that particular day. So apply the rules or guidelines at your discretion. Bend, manipulate them to suit and develop your own particular style. This is a far more creative and artistic approach to composition. I'm sure, or I hope you'll agree. My favorite quotes on compositional rules come from two great 20th century American photographers, Ansel Adams and Edward Weston. First, Ansel Adams, who said, "In my opinion, the so-called rules of composition are immaterial and irrelevant." And my favorite quote, probably my favorite quote about photography, but certainly about composition, from Edward Weston, who said, "To consult the rules of composition before taking a picture is a little like consulting the law of gravity before going for a walk." On every workshop that I run, I tell participants that the starting point for any image is to ask yourself, not just before you press the shutter, but almost before you get the camera out of the bag, why am I taking this photograph? What am I trying to say about the subject matter in front of me? And the answer to this question shapes and informs all subsequent decisions, I think. So, where do I place the camera? Which lens do I use? What aperture do I use in terms of, what depth of field am I looking for? What filters do I fit? And so one of the other considerations is, how do I design this photograph? How do I compose this photograph to express what I want to say about the subject? And this particular photograph, and I apologize up front in case I cause any offense, but it was taken on the mouth of the River Tees at a place called Paddy's Hole. And it's I call it, which probably sums up my feelings most appropriately, I call it Mordor. Those of you read Lord of the Rings, the source of all evil. I really hate the place. It's a grotty, scrubby, untidy place, as you can see from this photograph. Within the distance, you've got, well, you used to have a steelworks, no longer functioning, chemical works, nuclear power plant, the docks, etc., etc. I just hate the place, and it depresses the hell out of me. So I don't take what I would call pretty attractive photographs when I'm there, but I do try to take photographs that capture what I feel about the place. Now, I've tried to use some compositional guidelines, rules, if you want to call them that, in terms of having some foreground interest. These old dilapidated boats here in the foreground. And I've also tried to get this snaking line of the mouth of the harbour, so a little natural harbour, going through the photograph to take you to the industrial mess beyond. But I deliberately went there. I mean, I've seen photographs that Joe Cornish, for instance, who lives not a million miles from here. I've seen photographs that Joe's taken, very attractive photographs, nice warm light. The tide is in. It looks quite a picturesque place when he photographs it in that way, but that's not how I respond to it. So I deliberately went when I knew that the tide would be out, that reveals all this sort of scrappy, muddy, horrible base to the harbour. It also reveals all of this grot, tin cans, Coke bottles, water bottles, everything else that you see in the photograph. So the composition, there's some sort of structure to it, but basically I wanted to leave it quite messy and untidy and chaotic. Because that's how I respond. That's how I see the place. Somebody once said to me they thought it was a very Steve Gosling photograph, and hopefully you might see what they mean by the time we get to the end. But very much so. It was a deliberate decision. It wasn't a random act. It wasn't an accident. It was a deliberate choice. My response to the subject in front of me. To further demonstrate what I'm saying about the composition reflecting what you want to say, I'm going to show you a couple of photographs taken of the same subject at a place called Grytviken, which is the old whaling station taken down in South Georgia near Antarctica. This photograph was taken to show the ships in the context of the location, with the ships discarded and left to rot, a bit like the animal bones in front of them that you see, particularly on the left-hand side there. So I decided to go wide. I wanted to place the ships to show the old decaying wooden jetty on the right and the mountains beyond. I wanted to show that context. It's a scene-setting photograph. Move to the next image. Photograph of the same two ships, but this time I went in close. The composition was determined by my interest in the textures of decay, the rotting ropes, the rusting metal, and the sense of history that all conveyed to me. Now, these are two images of essentially the same subject, two rotting whaling ships, but the different compositions express two very diverse messages. And personally, I prefer the graphic simplicity of this last image. Which brings me to my next point, the application compositionally of the KISS principle, the keep it simple, stupid principle. I argue quite strongly when I'm running workshops with people to simplify photographs. Make sure that the photograph is only saying one thing. A common problem that I see with participants' images on workshops is that they're trying to cram too much information into one photograph. As a result, the core message, what they're really trying to say, gets lost in a clutter and confusion of overwhelming visual information. I always use this analogy. It's a bit like having three people standing in front of you, speaking to you at the same time. You'll get bits of each of the three conversations, but you won't hear any one conversation very clearly. And sometimes photographically, it's much better to take three simple, clear messages than to try and cram all of those things into one image. So decide what the photograph is about and make sure that your compositional choices make this one thing very, very clear to the viewer. I use this expression, grab it visually by the scruff of the neck. Leave the viewer in no doubt as to what the photograph is about. So this photograph was taken on the same trip in 2016 to Antarctica and South Georgia. This was taken in Antarctica at a place called Wilhelmina Bay. About 4 o'clock in the morning, the captain of the ship deliberately grounded the bow on the sea ice, and we were able to get off the ship and walk straight down the steps onto the sea ice to be greeted by this amazing minimalist photographer's dream of snow and ice. Just amazing. The odd seal, the odd seabird, but mainly just sea and ice. And as I was walking past the ship, I looked beyond the bow and saw the shape of the mountain behind, which looked to me like an upturned ship. So I had the shape of the bow in the foreground and this shape that was echoed, I thought, in the background. And so the photograph was just about demonstrating that relationship, that graphical geometric relationship between those shapes. So I deliberately kept it simple. And also, you've got that tonal contrast between the light background and the dark ship in the foreground. Somebody asked me once whether that white slash was a deliberate choice. You know, did I leave that in the photograph? And the honest response to that is yes, I did. You know, I think this particular person thought I should have cloned it out or not included it in the shot to start with. But I quite like that. It's sort of, if your eye is tempted to wander out the right-hand side of the frame, it's a bit like a finger that's pointing you back towards the core of the photograph. So I like to take what I call a reductionist approach to composition. So I'm always asking myself, how much more can I take out of an image and still retain its core message? How much can I strip out of it? So my advice is frame your shot, and then before you fire the shutter, consider how you can exclude any extraneous elements, maybe by moving closer or zooming in or fitting a longer focal length lens, for example. And I suggest just try it. If you don't normally do this, try it. You might find yourself pleasantly surprised at how much you can remove from the frame and still keep the core of the subject. This photograph was taken on the Lincolnshire coast, and I really like the graphic shapes, the varying tones, and the diverse textures. Everything else was consciously excluded, deliberately taken out of the frame. And here's a photograph that was taken in the Faroe Islands, where again I stripped the composition back to the bare essentials. The low-hanging cloud, the stark nature of the scene sums up the Faroe Islands for me. I don't know if anybody listening has ever been. Incredible place to go and photograph. In terms of photography, in terms of geography and geology, for me, it feels like it's a cross between Iceland and the Isle of Skye, which I guess is not surprising given it's situated between the two, but a fantastic place to go and photograph. This is another photograph that's fairly typical of my minimalist style. It was taken early one morning as a band of gentle rain moved across Derwent Water, covering the distant fells in a very fine veil of mist. And I composed so that the island was my focal point and the fells beyond just simple shapes of varying tones as a backdrop. Very simple image, but it works for me because of the simplicity. Even in locations that are chaotic woodlands, like this one, for example, taken a few years ago in Denmark, I'm always trying to simplify, to find some order or structure in the chaos, even in places like woodlands that are normally fairly chaotic and difficult to get simple compositions. I ought to mention at this point an alternative school of thought, just for balance. Swedish photographer Jan Tove, in a book that I don't think you can get in English anymore. I think the Swedish version's still available. Not that that matters too much. The photographs are interesting to look at. But in the text, in the English version, in his Beyond Order book, he says that landscape and nature photographers shouldn't try to impose order on the natural world. What he argues is it's chaotic, it's unstructured. So just portray it like that. Go with the flow. Photograph the chaos. Photograph what is in front of your camera. Don't try to impose some design order on it. So his key message is simply to embrace and find beauty in the chaos. Have to say, I do try to go with that spirit occasionally, but as here, but my natural instinct is to simplify and organize. Can't get away from that, I'm afraid. When designing an image, it's also important to be clear, what's your focal point? Most images, but not all, most images have a key focal point, and I refer to it as the visual hook, the main element in the composition that you want the viewer to concentrate their attention on which the rest of the picture is structured. So, for example, your focal point could be a lone tree. You saw my photograph earlier, a pier or a jetty, or as here, a building in the landscape. The barn in the scene's the focal point. And for me, it's very important in the composition. It's typical of the location, Swaledale, here in the Yorkshire Dales, and it gives a sense of place as a result of that. It also provides an idea of scale, and the sheep, of course, help in that process as well. So given its importance, I waited until it was lit and the fell side behind was in shadow. So that gives some impression of three-dimensionality. And also I waited until not only I had that particular arrangement of light and shade, but also that there was dappled light down the dale. So I hope that draws you, the viewer, into and through the image, in that you're starting to follow the light down the dale as it progresses. This photograph was taken at Glenfinnan, close to where Bonnie Prince Charlie gathered the clans in 1745 before marching his troops into battle against the English when he was trying to stake his claim to the throne. And this monument you see here was erected in the memory of the members of the clans who lost their life in that particular battle. And in this image, it serves as a very obvious focal point. I've been there many times and never really got a photograph prior to this one that I was happy with. They was just sort of bland tourist photographs. But I went there on quite a stormy day, and I was rewarded by this gathering of storm clouds. When the photograph was taken, it was a case of running round in front of the camera, wiping the front of the lens dry, opening the shutter, hoping it stayed dry during a long exposure, and then just taking a few really in the hope that I'd get one that didn't have rain spots on the front. The fact that I had this gathering storm and it was a place where the troops had gathered prior to a battle, I thought that was a happy and lucky coincidence of the historical context and the weather. So I set up and I waited, particularly looking to get this main focal point against the light area of sky. You can imagine when it had dark clouds behind it, it just tonally merges into this area in the back. So I wanted a lighter area of sky. So waiting for a bit of a hole in the clouds to come before I opened the shutter. Once you've identified your focal point, then obviously the next decision is, where do I place it in the frame? And this is, I guess, sometimes where the rule of thirds might help. So what I do is I'm thinking in design terms, where's my focal point? How do I take the viewer on a visual journey that leads them to it? So I want them to explore the rest of the frame, but ultimately I want their eyes to fix on that focal point. So if you look at the design of this image, which is taken at a place called Brimham Rocks, again, not too far from where I'm living at the moment. And what I did was I designed the image so you've got all of these lines taking you in from the corners of the frame down to this tree. You've also got this interesting sort of profile of people see it as a face, nose, eye, nose, mouth, chin, and so on. And also, I tried to use the tonal separation. These rocks were actually getting a bit more light than those in the background, but I've accentuated that in the processing. So I've highlighted these rocks a little more and I've darkened these rocks down. So hopefully tonally you're being pushed towards that tree as well. All of those things are, I hope, successful in a compositional sense, in that they're taking your eye to that key focal point. Here's another example where I've used line and shape to move the viewer around the frame, ultimately ending up at my chosen focal point, I hope. This is a loch in Scotland on Rannoch Moor that I visited, again, another place I've been to many times, and most of the time unsuccessfully. It's one of those places you can go to 10 times and probably only get one photograph out of the 10 visits. This particular occasion, it was taken in November. It's quite a cold day. And I spent some time walking along the edge of the loch looking for a composition. There was no sun out at that particular point in time, so there was no pressure on me in terms of setting up quickly. So I just explored for a while, walking around, trying to find a composition that pleased me. And I found this I call this shot stepping stones, this zigzagging line of stones that eventually take you to this island, and this tree which very conveniently bends and points like a finger towards this mountain in the distance, which was my key focal point. I did once tell a group that I swung on the top of that tree for a couple of hours to make it bend in that direction, but they didn't believe me, and I suspect you wouldn't either. But it's a good tale. No, fortunately, nature has done that for me. Just one of those lucky things that helped me in the composition. I set up and waited, and I probably waited for an hour and a half, 2 hours, I would think, for the light to come out of the cloud. The sun was setting over to the left as you're looking at the image behind the mountains there, and I'd given up. I thought that I'd lost the light. It had dropped too low and I wasn't going to get any light on the mountain. So I started to pack away. Fortunately, as a matter of experience and habit, the last thing that I take down is the tripod. So I was putting the camera back in the bag, having taken the filters off and so on. And I turned around and just saw the sun, the last bit of light just kissing the mountain. So I quickly got the camera back out, put it back on the tripod, which was still in exactly the same position, refitted filters, and took my shot. I got a couple of frames before I lost the light completely. But I guess there are sort of compositional lessons there, but the other lesson is don't be too hasty to take the tripod down. Good friend of mine tells me that I'm guilty of putting hope over experience. That I know that really experience tells me that I'm never going to get the light that I want, but I'm always hopeful. And this is one of those occasions where it was good to put hope over experience. In terms of moving the viewer around the frame, S or Z shapes are always useful. And in this photograph, I've used the line of the rocks and the light on the water as lines, leading lines that are snaking through the image, leading you to Bamburgh Castle beyond. My hope was that the viewer's eye would also be led to the castle in the distant haze by the fact that this area is one of the lightest parts of the image. And our eyes tend to be drawn towards light areas in a photograph. Now, that can often be a problem to avoid. Light patches in a background, for instance, if we're photographing, say, a close-up, say, of a flower, if you've got a light patch in the background, the viewer's eye gets distracted, it gets drawn to that. But sometimes we can use that knowledge to our advantage, as here, by keeping the castle or the area around the castle as one of the lighter areas in the frame. The viewer's eye, I hope, as a result, gets drawn to it. Here's a photograph that uses both an inverted S shape, so the line of these barns, but also Z shapes as the walls are zigzagging backwards and forwards across the frame. This is another photograph taken in Swaledale in the Yorkshire Dales. And the dappled patches of light and shade are also very important to me in the overall composition. What I wanted, because the barns are obviously key elements in the photograph, what I wanted was each roof of every barn to be lit. I didn't want the roofs to be in shade, and I also wanted dappled light evenly distributed both left and right across the frame and front to back. And there were times when the left hand side was lit and the right side was in shade, or vice versa, or I got 3 barn roofs lit and 3 were in shade, etc. You can imagine any combination of those things, and I must have had them. Again, it's another example of where I stood waiting for a couple of hours until all of the elements came together. And this is, I've taken this location, gun aside, I've taken this photograph quite a few times. This is the one that I'm happiest with. This is the one that I would put as a print on my wall, although I don't have any of my photographs on the wall at home. There's a story there that I can tell you if you're interested at some point. One of the key challenges for any photographer is to create a sense of 3-dimensionality in a 2-dimensional image. So receding lines and shapes are quite useful in that respect. In this image, taken at Fountains Abbey, again, another place not too far from where I live, the pores of light and the repeating shapes of the windows not only take the viewer into the image, but hopefully also convey a sense of depth, because our brains assess what our eyes see. And the brain assumes that in reality, the windows are the same size, which of course they are, roughly. And so therefore, our brain concludes that the smallest window must be further away. And thereby, that in our head creates a sense of depth. We see three-dimensionality in that two-dimensional photograph. We can also use repetition of shapes to not only provide a sense of depth, but also to link elements of a composition together. Here I've used the repeating triangular shapes of the icebergs in the foreground, the dark mountain behind, and the lighter mountain behind that, to connect the foreground to the background. And offsetting, as I've done here, light tones against dark against light also helps that sense of recession to accentuate depth. This is another photograph from the Faroe Islands, and I was attracted to this scene by the repetition of triangular shapes throughout the frame. My title for it is Apex. Surprise, surprise. So from the apex of the building in the foreground, all the way through to the apex of that distant mountain, it's all about the repetition of shapes. Just want to draw your attention quickly to something that was very important to me in the design of this particular image, and it's this separation here between the apex, or the roof in the foreground, and the bottom light area of the church here. I wanted that small separation between the two. I didn't want this roof line coming down here, which if I'd gone slightly to the left, that would have been the result. I definitely wanted that separation. So just attention to small details, which I will come back to later. Here's another image where I've used repeating shapes in the frame to link different parts of the composition together. So this is an old boat upturned, converted into a fisherman's hut on Lindisfarne, Holy Island, up in Northumberland. These boats are slowly disappearing, rotting and falling apart, but there are still a few of them left. And I particularly like all of this sort of organized chaos, really, this organized clutter in the foreground, which says a lot about the fishermen and what they do. But also I was drawn by the fact that this shape here echoes for me the shape of the castle. So there was a correlation between those two things, a connection, a visual connection between foreground and background. And as somebody pointed out to me, but I have to confess I didn't see it at the time, there's also a visual connection between here, this upturned funnel and the top of the shed and the castle in the distance. The one thing that made me definitely take this photograph, I've visited this location many times, but on this one particular day, I saw that the top area of the shed here, I saw it and I thought, that looks just like the sorting hat in the Harry Potter films. That's my title for the photograph, the sorting hat. And it made me smile. And that was enough, the sort of added element that was enough to make me put the tripod down and take the photograph. I know some of you are saying I'm easily pleased, and that's probably very true. You may have noticed that many of my compositions are very geometrically structured. Triangles are a particular favorite of mine, and that wasn't something that I was conscious of until my wife pointed it out to me, and I was showing her some photographs one day, and she said, yeah, they're very much Steve Gosling photographs. And I sort of puzzled look and said, what does that mean? And she said, they're just very geometrically designed. They're very graphically designed. And it just brought home to me, yeah, I guess that's, that is my style, but I hadn't acknowledged it before. I think it's true that others often recognize our style before we do. This photograph was taken up in Scotland on Loch Shiel. This is the Green Isle. You can only reach it by chartering a private boat. You can't get a sort of public trip to the place. Thousands and thousands of people buried on this very small island. Going back, people have been buried there for hundreds of years. And I just like this graphic triangular relationship between the medieval style cross, the Victorian gravestone, and this little forlorn tree. So it was that triangular relationship that really drew me to this. It sort of captured for me the forlorn nature of the quite sad nature of the location. I deliberately got down low for two reasons. One, so you can see the text on the gravestone in front of me, but also if I got up any higher, you would have seen the distant landscape beyond, and that just confused the composition for me. It wasn't simple enough. You know, the eye starts to get drawn to the mountains in the background, and I definitely didn't want that particular distraction. You will have, I'm sure, your own favorite shapes and designs, and what I've learned from my own experience is that your doodles might help reveal them. So what do I mean by that? Often when I'm talking to people on the phone, and I'm concentrating on what they're saying, I'll have a pad in front of me and a pen in my hand, and I'm just scribbling away on the pad. And I've noticed on a few occasions when I looked at what I draw, and they were just sort of random shapes, really, nothing structured, nothing organized, nothing meaningful at all, but often a series of interlocking geometric shapes, and usually triangles, you know, star shapes that interlock, for instance. So there's obviously some subconscious attraction for me in those shapes. And when I've looked at my photographs and I looked at the ones that I particularly like, I realized that they sort of look a bit like my doodles. So if you doodle, if you draw, think about the shapes that appeal to you, and then consciously go out and find them, go looking for them, but also force yourself to work out of your comfort zone. So go in search of compositions that don't conform to your favorite shapes. So for instance, if you like hard edged geometric shapes, like me, for instance, then look for softer flowing designs, or vice versa, of course. I now want to talk about the orientation of the camera, and I suspect it's not something that many of us think about when it comes to taking a photograph and composition. I've not done any research on this, but my guess is that most photographs are taken in the horizontal or landscape format. Cameras are generally designed to make this the easier orientation to hold the camera in, and therefore I think it's one that we all naturally gravitate to. Using the camera in vertical or portrait mode requires a conscious decision to turn it on its side. And using the camera in this way can also involve some sort of contortion of body and hands. It's just not, it doesn't feel naturally comfortable to hold the camera in that way, certainly not as comfortable as it is horizontally. And even using the camera on a tripod is usually less work in landscape than vertical format, unless you have one of these plates that you can turn quite easily. I don't use them because I don't like the weight and the bulk that they add, but I guess they do make that switching of orientation much easier. If you look at your photographs, my guess is that you'll probably have a preference that you'll take more landscape than horizontal images, or the other way around. I know my preference is really for landscape format images, but I know from talking to Joe Cornish, a lot of his photographs are taken in portrait orientation, and there's a reason for that I will come on to. If you do have a preference, that's perfectly fine, but my suggestion is don't always use it. Force yourself to use the opposite orientation. So perhaps, I know this feels a bit artificial, but sometimes it's a good development exercise to go out and say, I'm only going to take photographs that work. They have to work, not just any photograph, that work in, if you normally take landscape format, in portrait format, or again, vice versa, as I say. So try to find new ways of seeing and designing an image. Again, it's about forcing yourself out of the comfort zone. The orientation can also influence the viewer's reaction to an image. So the horizontal format, as here, is generally more passive, where the viewer becomes an observer of the photograph. This particularly suits photographs where you want to recreate a feeling of calm, tranquility and restfulness. So this is exactly what I wanted to do here. I've also tried to emphasize that feeling by placing the horizon line very close to the center of the image, one of the things that we're told we shouldn't really do. But what it does is in doing it, putting it in that particular place, it imparts a sense of balance and harmony, which is exactly what I wanted to achieve. I didn't want to disturb the viewer in any way, far from it. In contrast, the vertical format is more active, more dynamic, in that it invites the viewer to be part of the scene. For example, this photograph, I hope, encourages the viewer to be more than a simple observer, to step onto that road. I hope you look at that and you want to step onto that road, walk down it towards Mount Cook, which is just sneaking out of the clouds in the distance. Now, New Zealand, there's a country I would have liked to have been in this year, I tell you, for a whole range of reasons. In this photograph, I've used the leg shape in the foreground. This was taken on the Isle of Skye, and I've used that leg shape in the foreground to direct the viewer's attention towards the Coolin in the distance there. Similarly, with this photograph taken on South Georgia, I've used the finger-shaped pool in the foreground to try and entice the viewer into the frame, to try and encourage them to take a journey towards those distant mountains. I want you to feel as if you can walk into that landscape. So think about the response that you want from your viewer before you bring the camera into use. The next aspect of composition I want to talk about, and I sort of hinted at this earlier in the talk, is what I call sweating the details. Getting the first 95% of a composition right is relatively easy, I would argue, but it's the small details that can make or break a photograph. So my advice always to people on workshops is particularly give attention to the edges of the frame and make sure that there's nothing creeping into the image, a leaf, twig, branch, or some other element that shouldn't be there. We tend to visually sort of focus on the center of the image, and sometimes that's to the detriment of the rest of the frame. Consider the intersection of lines. They shouldn't disrupt the flow or the rhythm of an image. So if you look at this photograph, there's a sort of zigzagging flow going on here through the frame that I hope takes you through the image, engages you to go through and look at all of the frame. We also need, in terms of having an eye on details, just pay attention to the background. That's not a particular issue in this image, but just consider all of the elements in the frame. And as I said earlier, if it shouldn't be there, find a way of taking it out. This photograph is a pretty good example of how I normally work, where I carefully considered every element in the frame before taking the shot. So, for instance, the gap between the top of this rocky outcrop here and I think this is the Great Blasket Island behind off the west coast of Ireland. So that gap was deliberately considered. That gap between the top of this rock and the rocky outcrop in the background here, that was carefully considered, as was this gap between the top of that rock and the cliff edge here. Also, this gap between the rocks was really important. I wanted to show that they were actually two separate rocks rather than one. So that gap was carefully considered, and even the inclusion of this rock. Now, some people have said to me they would take that out. I deliberately left it in, and it doesn't bother me that it sits on the edge of the frame. I left it in for two reasons. One, this was tonally, thinking black and white, this was tonally a dead space, very uniform space. This just gave me a bit of a highlight. And also it was sort of finishing off the full stop, if you like, in that zigzagging process going through the frame. So it was, again, a conscious choice to leave it in there. Whether it should be in there or should be out, there's not a right or wrong. It's very much a personal choice. So take your time, consider your options before placing the tripod and the camera in place to take the shot. Here's another photograph where I had several design and compositional considerations to take into account when choosing where to place the tripod. So primarily, I wanted this sense of diagonal movement from the rocks in the foreground through to this lighthouse, which is at Nice Point on the Isle of Skye, to the lighthouse in the distance. Things that were important to me is I wanted to keep the top of the cliff below the horizon line, which I've just managed to do. I didn't want the line of this rock cutting across this cliff face here, so I didn't want it. If I'd gone lower, it would have sat up here somewhere. I definitely didn't want that. I wanted that separation, and also I wanted separation here between the rock and the top of the cliff below me. The other thing that I was just incredibly lucky, and sometimes these things happen. If you look at the lighthouse, it sort of sits on, there are two pads at the end of the cliff face here. And if you look at this rock, it echoes the shape of the cliff here. So that was a conscious choice. But if you look here, this rock has two pads that sort of mirror the two pads at the end of the cliff. If they hadn't have been there, I'd have still taken the photograph. It wasn't a deal breaker as far as the shot was concerned, but just one of those lucky things that I smiled at when I saw it. So sometimes the photography gods smile on us and everything comes together, but more often than not, we have to learn to accept what I call the least damaging compromise, because as landscape photographers, we're working out in the natural world. And no matter how hard we try, no matter what lens we fit or where we consider placing the camera, we move it left, right, up or down centimeters, there can be something that doesn't conform. I was going to say to our desire, I'll say my desire, I've got to own this, my desire for a neat, orderly and structured composition. And in these situations, I ask myself, is there one of these compromises that to the ideal that I can live with? And by live with, I mean, if it was a print on the wall and I had to look at it every day, would it be acceptable? Would I be happy with it, or would it irritate the hell out of me? And if it's the latter, then I know, walk away. No point in wasting time taking the shot, because I'll never do anything with it. I'll never process it. It's just a waste of time. So this photograph was taken at a place called Morro Bay on the Californian coast. This particular part of the coast is known for its mist and fog. This one morning, I was only there for 2 mornings. This particular morning, the famous Morro Rock was just peering out of the mist. So I went down to the harbour. I found this particular scene. I like the textures on the rope, as you've seen before, something that draws me, and the textures on the wood. That all drew me to this particular spot. The thing that irritated me was just this bit of the ship pointing into, touching the rock. I'd have rather that been over here somewhere. The ship was way too big for me to pull it back. Perhaps if there'd been somebody on board, I might have asked them if there was any way the ship could be moved, but there wasn't. It's fairly early in the morning. And I tried moving left, right, up and down, and I couldn't solve that problem. And I had a choice to make. Do I walk away, or could I live with that compromise? And I decided that, it's not 200 yards from where I live. I can't go back tomorrow and see if the ship's in a different place. I'll take the photograph, and I'm prepared to live with the compromise, because I still like the other elements in the frame. So sometimes we have to accept the compromise and take the photograph. Excuse me while I just have a drink of water. This photograph was taken on the Lofoten Islands in one winter, 2-3 years ago. And I wanted to capture the cold, stark, bleak nature of the landscape. So I composed to use the rocks in the foreground to give me some interest there, and the arc of the bay sweeping around to the mountains in the distance. Ideally, I would have liked to have got the full sweep of the bay without clipping off this small area here. But as hard as I tried, that wasn't possible. Trying to achieve it created additional and different compositional and logistical problems. So, for example, I was actually stood on some rocks that were about 2 feet high. If I'd gone back even a foot, I would have had to come off the rocks, which would have put me lower, which would have then meant that these rocks here were cutting into the rocks in the water. So I decided that was a compromise I was prepared to accept. I have been asked in the past, Why didn't I just clone in some snow-covered beach to solve the problem? Well, primarily, I think that gap is small enough for our eyes and our brain to make that visual leap around that corner and carry on that journey. I don't think if that gap, if it come here, perhaps the gap's too big, but it's quite a small gap. So I was prepared to live with it from that point of view. But also, leaving it is a useful reminder to me that the natural world isn't perfect from a design perspective. And most importantly, it reminds me that I'm just a mere mortal. Certainly in the face of nature, I'm a mere mortal and I can't control everything. Sometimes you just have to accept that it is what it is and live with it. As I've got older, I've become more Buddhist-like in both hairstyle and in philosophy, as you can hear. My prime aim with my photography is to communicate what I feel as much, if not more, than what I see. So when I'm looking at a subject or a scene, I'm often trying to consider not only what it is that's appealing to me visually, but how can I make an interesting composition? And I'm also assessing, how do I feel? Is the landscape generating an emotional response in me, or do I have some predominant emotional feeling that this landscape helps me to communicate? Don McCullin, photographer I'm sure you all know, British photographer, best known for his images of war, although he's turned to taking dark and brooding landscapes in his latter years. He said, photography for me is not looking, it's feeling. If you can't feel what you're looking at, then you're never going to get others to feel anything when they look at your pictures. And composition is a key tool that we can use to convey mood and emotion to the viewer of our images. This photograph was taken on the 4-week trip I did to Antarctica and South Georgia. And on the day that I took it, I'd probably been away from home a couple of weeks. I don't know why. I don't usually get homesick, but I was feeling quite homesick and missing my family and the dog back at home in the UK. And early one morning, I was wandering on the beach. The workshop group I was with were all happy off taking photographs, and I was just reflecting on how I was feeling. And I saw this lone penguin, as I don't know if it's a he or she. Don't know how you would tell the difference. That's not my area of expertise, so I'll refer to him as he. He just wandered, tottered over the rocks as penguins do in front of me, and his whole demeanor really just seemed to capture how I was feeling. So I placed the penguin in the center of the frame. I used a wide angle lens, the Olympus 7-14 Pro Zoom, to isolate it from the background. So to isolate it from those penguins behind, as a way of conveying this sense of loneliness, which was how I was feeling, as I said. I've been photographing this tree for many years now, and visually it's taken in the Lake District, Derwentwater. Visually, I love the graphic nature of the root structure. Emotionally, I'm impressed by and in awe of its determination to cling to life. It seems to be grasping at what is left of the earth around it, and trying so frantically to stay alive for a little bit longer. And I find that both sad and inspiring. Sad because it's a desperate battle with the inevitable. We all know what's going to happen. One year I'll go back and it'll be lying in the water decaying. But also inspiring because against the odds, it's remained in this state for a long time. I must have been visiting this location for 25, 30 years. And this tree has not changed very much. More roots exposed, but it's still hanging on there. So compositionally, I've emphasized its precarious existence by concentrating on the root structure in the foreground through using, again, a wide angle lens to make the most of that. As I drove along the road on the Isle of Skye late one evening, as a storm moved in, I spotted this lone white cottage in the gloom. It was dwarfed by a very threatening sky as the storm moved in over the Coolin Hills directly behind. The cottage felt isolated, overshadowed and exposed to the elements around it. Again, a bit of a metaphor for the way that I was feeling. But the cottage somehow seemed to offer a sanctuary, a haven providing shelter and protection. And I tried to capture those feelings by placing the cottage. So one, it was very small in the frame. that emphasized its isolation and its vulnerability, but also by positioning it centrally in the photograph, I was trying to convey its importance. And I processed the image to underline the cottage as a bright element surrounded by dark tones, to visually represent that cottage as a beacon. I could just imagine sitting in there with a log fire burning and a whiskey in my hand. So like a lighthouse at a harbour entrance, it hinted at safety and the possibility of respite from the elements. But again, the composition was an important choice in trying to convey that mood. This is a photograph of a Viking burial mound in Denmark, and I found it quite a spectral and haunting location, maybe because I knew of what it was, but I wanted to recreate a sort of stark, ghostly feel to the image. I therefore kept the composition very simple with minimal content, using the lines on the field to take the viewer to the mound and the copse of trees sitting on the top. I also processed the image so that it looked like it was taken by moonlight. What you actually see above the trees is the sun partially hidden behind the clouds. So who says the camera never lies? There's something about Scottish castles that makes me think of Dracula films. In the right weather conditions, I just think they ooze evil and malicious intent. And I guess that was, part of the design, really. They wanted to put off any potential attacker. On this day at Castle Stalker, the lighting was perfect. The sky was cooperating, quite an interesting, dramatic sky. So I searched hard for a composition that reflected the mood of Dracula's castle. And eventually I came across this rock, and when I saw it, I knew that I had my composition. This gargoyle-like face, 2 eyes, a nose and a gaping mouth, just gave me, I thought, a sort of visual and metaphorical connection between the foreground and the background. Which brings me to my next point. And we're getting close to the end of my presentation. Photographer Minor White once said, photograph not just what something is, but what else it could be. And what he was encouraging was a non-literal interpretation of a subject to add an alternative, more interesting perspective. In 1963, Minor White also wrote about the notion of equivalence, a term first coined by Alfred Stieglitz in the early 20th century. And Minor White said, when a photographer presents us with what to him is an equivalent, he is telling us, in effect, I had a feeling about something. And here is my metaphor of that feeling. The significant difference here, he said, is that what he had a feeling about was not for the subject he photographed, but for something else. Very simply, the notion of equivalence places the photograph as a symbol or a metaphor rather than a literal description of a subject. And you can see I do that quite a lot in my photography. This photograph was taken on my father's birthday about 10 years after he'd passed away. I'd been thinking about him a lot that morning and about the cycle of life. We're born, we live, we die, and hopefully a bit of us lives on in some way through our children, people we've helped or influenced, or something we've created, and so on. And this influenced the idea behind this shot as reflected in my title for it, which is the circle of life. So in the content of the photograph, the circle of stones in the foreground and the infinite circle of clouds that become rain, of the water in the lake that then become rain, that become clouds, The water in the lake become clouds that then becomes rain, that becomes water in the lake, and the cycle keeps on going. Visually, I was attracted by the circle of stones in the foreground, thought they would work well with a long exposure because that smoothed the water and accentuated the circular shape of the rocks, but also their texture. But this isn't a photograph primarily about a scene in the Lake District. Most importantly for me as the photographer, it's about the metaphor that underpins it. A really interesting book I can recommend that explores this notion of equivalence in more detail, and one I can highly recommend is by a guy called Guy Tal, an American photographer, and it's called More Than a Rock. Definitely a good read if that notion of photographs as metaphors appeals to you. So this has been a relatively quick introduction to my thoughts on composition. Hopefully it's prompted ideas about how you can improve and develop your own compositional skills. I would add that you can also learn a lot by analysing the images taken by photographers whose work you admire. So, excuse me, deconstruct their images. Ask yourself, what are they trying to say to me, the viewer, and how have they used composition to aid the communication of their message? Excuse me, I need some more water, sorry. Analyze your own work. Learn from your failures. I have this expression, our failures are our best teachers. Ask yourself why the image hasn't worked. If you're disappointed with it, why hasn't it worked? And if you were in that situation again, how would you change the photograph? Thinking about composition, how would you change the design of the photograph to improve it? This process of analysis, reflection and learning is crucial, I believe, to our development as photographic artists. It's a painful process to look at the things that haven't worked, but that's where the source of greatest learning lies. But ultimately, composition is a skill best learnt through practice. You can read all you like, but the best way of mastering composition is to get out there with your camera and experiment. So just to close, I'm planning to do a book on a PDF book on composition. If you're interested in getting more information about that in the future, then you can sign up for my newsletter via the contact page on my website. A quick advert, sorry guys, but if you're looking for a Christmas present, you might also be interested in one of the books, one of my 4 books. Again, if you look on the relevant page on my website, you can get more information. That's enough from me. Thanks very much for listening, and I'm happy to take questions if there are any.
Well, thank you very much for that, Steve.
Hello.
Hi.
Thank you for that.
That's all right. Good.
It's very cool.
What a very interesting
it was,
take.
Very interesting, and I love your minimalist style and the geometric side to it. It really resonates with the type of photography I'm into.
Thank you.
Question for you.
Yep.
Feel free, anybody, to put questions in the comments, and we'll ask Steve. Why do you not put your pictures up around the house?
I was going to ask that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I guess I run. The first thing is sort of serious point is I run a lot of workshops with other professional photographers, and I'm a great believer in that. You know, we should try and share our images with people. So I often talk to them about, you know, do they want to do a print swap? And so I've got lots of photographs by some amazing photographers from across the world. And I don't have enough wall space, even in the new house, although I've got lots of space behind me. I just don't have enough wall space to put all the photographs up. But one of the other things was that my eldest son, who's now 32, when he was 15, we'd just decorated the hall and stairs in the old house, and so we had blank walls. And I just had an exhibition, and you know, as is often the case, you don't sell every print from an exhibition, so I brought some back. And my wife was moaning at me about, so what's going to happen to these? They're just going to sit stuck in a bedroom, you know, leaning up against the wall. Why don't you put them on the hall and stairs? So I spent, you know, half a day putting them up on the wall, and my 15-year-old son came home from school, dropped his rucksack off his back, took his coat, hung it on the bottom of the stairs, took a cursory look around and went, huh, well, that's a bit vain, isn't it? Putting your own photographs on the wall. And I thought, perhaps that's right. So, you know, yeah, so this was the son that got his revenge for what I said to him when he was younger. You know, he got his revenge on me. And so I've never quite had the spirit to put my photographs up on the wall.
No, that's brilliant. There's a couple of things there then that we can also sort of provide challenges and information for people. I think doing the picture swap is a very nice idea, especially
like
if you
footballers swapping
yes,
shirts.
like swapping shirts. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, if any of the viewers here sort of go out with friends and things like that, and, you know, you've both had a fantastic sort of maybe weekend away or when permitted, obviously, you know, a nice time, you know, rather than, you know, and you've both got great images, actually try picking your favorite and then maybe swapping it, you know, with a friend and sticking not your image up, but a friend's image up or something like that. I think that's a really nice thing to do.
The good thing about it is that, sorry to interrupt you, Paul, but the good thing about it is that you know, you can be in the same location. I know this from running workshops. I can be in the same location as 6 other photographers, and they will all be taking different photographs. And we can be in a location that I've been to, you know, 100 times before, and there will be somebody in that group, at least one person in that group, who will find a photograph that I've never seen. So if you go out with your friends, we all see the world in different ways, and it's interesting to have other people's perceptions, other people's take on the landscape. And have that on our wall as a reminder that there's not just one way of seeing the world.
Yeah. And talking about seeing the world in different ways as well, another thing that sort of I've learned from just listening now is we can also invite people to potentially try and photograph maybe landscapes or things that they don't like, rather than going to views that you do, knowing that, oh, it's going to be a wonderful view. So head down to your local equivalent of Mordor and try and express potentially what you're feeling. So
yeah, go on, sorry,
which, you know, could be potentially quite hard in lovely North Wales where we are, but you know, I think, you know, there's beauty in things like that as well, isn't there, Steve?
Yeah, I was again, sorry to interrupt you. It's just as you're talking, you prompted something in my head that for me, a successful photograph is usually based on an emotional reaction to something, and that could be, wow, isn't that amazing? It could also be, wow, isn't that depressing? And the first time I went to Mordor, I was with a friend of mine, and we were only there.
Start calling you Frodo.
Yeah, you want to see my furry toes. And I said to my mate, we'd been there 15 minutes, and I said to him, I've got to go. And he said, why, you're not feeling well? I said, no, this place is depressing the hell out of me. I feel like the sky is coming down on top of me. And the steelworks was open then, so you had that sort of chlorine, acrid smell of smoke, you know. And I said to him, this is just depressing the hell out of me. This is depressing me. I can't stay. You know, I really can't stay here. And I was telling a friend of mine afterwards, and he said, wow, that's such a strong emotional reaction that, you know, you've got to go and photograph it. So I think either love or hate, you can find good photographs in either of those responses. Where I struggle is when I'm apathetic. If my response is, yeah, it's okay, then there's no point in me taking a photograph, because I'll feel, yeah, it's okay about the final image.
Yeah, it's very interesting actually, because you can be actually somewhere that feels, well, that maybe looks amazing, and somebody else might be having, like, you know, wonderful time seeing this view or something. But, you know, if your emotional sort of state isn't feeling almost the same way as what you're seeing almost in front of you, then I don't think almost you can do it justice in a way, almost. Yeah.
Again, another expression of mine is, you not only have to have your body in the right place, your head has to be in the right place too. And as you say, if you're distracted by, you know, you've had an argument with your member of your family at home, or you're going through you're being made redundant from work or whatever, you know, you've got this sort of messy stuff going on in your life. If that's in your head, it's almost impossible to get beyond that to create a good photograph, I think.
Yeah. I think, thankfully, though, I mean, with photography, and we've definitely seen it, is that it has the option of going to somewhere, and actually you get the emotion back from what you're seeing. So it can actually have a reverse effect of almost what you're saying as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I know from, when we were in lockdown and I photographed that infrared shot I showed taken in the local woods. I did an infrared based project in the local woods. It was the woods where I walked the dog fairly regularly. And I guess it's sort of taken it a bit for granted. And we went into lockdown, and of course I can only walk the dog there, for my period of exercise, but actually no cars, nobody else really in the woods, no background noise. And it was amazing, listening to the birds, watching the trees, looking at the texture, listening to the wind rustling through the leaves. It was very sustaining, I think is the best way I can describe it. Very sort of spiritually moving. And if my kids were here, they'd say, "Oh no, Dad's going into tree hugging mode." But I do think we can get a lot back from nature.
Incidentally, it's something that another very good photographer friend of mine did actually suggest trying.
All right.
Because I do a lot of woodland sort of photography myself. Joel's looking at me like, where's he going with this? So
I can't wait to take a picture of you hugging a tree.
Yeah, but no, he says you should really try it. And I felt a bit odd at the time. I really did.
Yeah.
I don't think maybe I got to the level of where he thought I would be. So I think it was all about the sort of like you're feeling the texture of the tree, and you can really be as one with it. But actually, when I pulled back from it, there was something there, but I didn't know what it was. But it sort of opened me up a little bit to photographing in the area where I was. So there's many ways of sort of experiencing things as well. So
I think photography can be a form of meditation. It certainly is sometime for me.
I think the awareness people have in terms of mindfulness and meditation, and especially in this busy world that we live in, and especially the past few months with the crazy world that we've lived in, being able to have a hobby that can get you into a different mindset and a different zone of thinking, etc., is very, very useful. And we've spoken about it on these shows before, especially people like Paul Sanders, and the cathartic nature of photography and the art of seeing, and that ability to see an image and create an image, and also be able to experience all of the senses around you, and that kind of almost bombardment of silence in some ways, and being attuned to what you wouldn't normally get to hear, going to a lake or something, and you're not hearing cars bustling past and sirens, etc. If you live in a large conurbation. So I think it makes a lot of sense. I'm not so sure I'll be going around hugging trees, but I think there is definitely something to be said about being in the moment. One of the guys that works with us, who's a very, very good landscape photographer, insanely good. He actually was in a book with Ansel Adams. He's very, very good. And he says when he runs workshops, he actually takes them out for a day without their cameras. So they can develop that ability to see without the pressure of making that image on a camera. And then also, you were saying about drawing doodles and things, and I was speaking to him, and he was saying, I believe that everybody has an inscape. So something in your mind that you will want to take a picture of or make an image of. And so he gets them to draw at the beginning of their workshop their perfect landscape.
All right. Okay.
And then he takes them through the week or the weekend, and they make their images, etc. And they show them at the end of each day. And then he says he gets them to pull out the drawing that they took at the beginning, made at the beginning of the week, and to see how closely they align. And he said it's very, very
that's really good idea.
To see how close it's unbelievable. So when you say about your doodles, and I was like, that's your inscape.
Yes, that's right.
That's what Phil calls your inscape.
I'll stop referring to them as doodles. They're my inscapes. Yeah. Sounds much better. Sounds much better. Yeah, I mean, when I'm running workshops, I frequently find myself encouraging people to just get out of the vehicle and not rush into taking a photograph. Just wander around, absorb the place, get a feel for it. Think about how you're reacting to it. Sometimes and particularly I run workshops where I'm transporting everybody around. Depends on the size of the group, but in a sort of VW transporter. So I can have 6 photographers in a VW transporter, and I feel like, and I've said this before, I feel like a pilot, in these Vietnam War movies where the helicopter pilot, before it's hit the ground, the Marines are jumping out and firing their machine guns, or sometimes before I've even put the handbrake on in the VW transporter, people are out and they've got the tripods up and they're taking photographs. And I'm just find myself saying regularly, slow down. There's no rush. It's not going anywhere. I mean, sometimes, the light's changing rapidly and you want to capture it, but generally you've got a lot more time. Just absorb it. And the other thing,
Steve's wearing the headset with the thing, like a pilot.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. It's my Vietnam helicopter
Captain
pilot
Steve.
Outfit. Yes, that's
Captain
right.
Gosling.
Yeah. The other thing I was going to say as well is that I talked a lot during the presentation about I waited here for 2 hours, or I waited here for an hour, and people often say to me, so what do you do? How do you occupy that? Do you take a book, or do you listen to music? And the answer is no. I just stand there and I just listen to the sounds. If I'm on the shore of a lake, I listen to the water lapping on the shore. I listen to the birds, the wind rustling in the trees. I do all of those things because I'm just absorbing what's in front of me. I don't want any distraction, because that way I'm immersed. It's a totally immersive experience.
Yeah,
definitely. Do you ever take a stove or a kettle or anything like that, or a thermos?
No, by the time I've got a backpack on my back and a tripod over my shoulder, I don't have room for anything else, so no.
I've heard a lot of landscape photographers who set up a little camping stove and make their cup of tea or coffee or soup, that they can do that whilst they're waiting.
The problem for me is that I become so totally focused on what's happening in front of me that or around me, I'd probably set fire to the woods, I'd burn a hole in the pan and the place would go up in flames, so not a great idea, really. It's when I'm running workshops, as a general principle, for instance, I say I'm not here to take photographs, because I'm not. I'm there to help people. But the other thing as well is, I guess it's, I'm a simple man. The other thing is, I can't concentrate on running a workshop and taking photographs. They're two separate processes for me. And the taking of the photographs is very much a personal, individual. My head's got to be in the right place to do it. And I can't do that and run a workshop and worry about what other people are doing with their tripod or their filters or whatever.
No, that's brilliant.
Makes sense. Sorry, I keep muting because my son's going to sleep.
Yeah. Well, I saw you blowing a kiss before, and I thought, well, that's very kind of you, but I didn't know whether to blow a kiss back or not. Yeah. I didn't know if it was directed to me or not.
I currently have my 10-month-old daughter in my arms right now, so I can't laugh too loud, otherwise she wakes up.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh, dear me.
We've got some questions. We've got one question from Steve. He says, "Magical Steve. Brilliant shapes in nature, totally inspiring. Is your preference black and white, or does it depend on the subject or location?"
I guess my default view is black and white. I was brought up shooting black and white. This is where Joel gives me some sarcastic response about my age, but
I was biting my tongue up. You gave me so many options.
I could see. So I'm going to get in there before you give me your response. Strike first, you see.
There's your competitive spirit.
Of course. Yeah. So I was brought up shooting black and white film, and so I learned, my early days in photography when I was sort of 6 or 7 was seeing the world as black and white, and that's stuck with me. So my default vision is to see it in black and white. But I'm not so rigid to say I would never take a color photograph. And if you look on my website, you'll see there are color images. The question I ask myself is, does color add anything to this photograph? Is it a crucial element in the subject, whatever that is, landscape or still life or whatever? And if the answer is yes, then, it's a color photograph. But generally, my default vision is black and white.
Do you tend to put your camera to like a black and white setting so it helps you see, or?
I don't. I do advise people on workshops, if they're not used to seeing in black and white, then change. If you're using a mirrorless camera, change the viewfinder so it's showing you a black and white image. And that's a great way of starting to learn to see the world in black and white. But as I say, I'm looking at a scene and I'm seeing it tonally rather than in terms of colors usually.
So that's you can actually look past the colors, as it were.
Yeah. The other thing that probably helps is that, like 1 in 3 males, I have some form of red-green color blindness. So that's when I was shooting slide film, and then I was scanning the slides and trying to process them many years ago, back in the sort of mid-90s when Photoshop first came out, I used to have to get the light box next to the computer screen and put the slide on the light box and then ask my wife, who's got good color vision, does that image on the screen look like that image on the light box? I'm less sort of anally retentive about those things now, as long as it doesn't look artificial, like as long as I haven't got purple leaves on the trees and things like that, then I don't worry. As long as it looks natural, then that's okay.
It's very interesting that it's not something we ever really spoke about in workflow and color management and printing, is it? About what colors people can and can't see.
Yeah.
I think it can be a very deep sort of conversation, that one.
We've had that social media thing, haven't we, where the color of the dress changes depending on who you are.
And it's the whole question of is what I see red, is it your red? And that's the point exactly. That I was running a workshop with another professional landscape photographer, and somebody asked him, so how do you worry about matching the colors in your final image with what you saw in the scene? And he said, I've got this color card and I photographed the color card in the scene and then I matched the colors afterwards. And then the person asking the question turned to me and they said, what do you do, Steve? And of course the flippant answer was, well, I take it in black and white, so who cares about the color? But then the serious answer, I said to them, if I'm taking a color photograph, I really don't care. I don't care. I'm not doing shoots for a fashion house. The red of the dress doesn't have to look the red of the image. I'm doing landscapes. It's an emotional thing, and as long as it looks okay to me and it doesn't look wacky, then that's fine. Because as you quite rightly said, how one viewer will see the red in that scene is totally different to how another viewer would. So even if you color match it to how it was, it's your perception of how it was, and the other person will see it in a completely different way. So why spend hours agonizing over it? I know I'm going to get some stick for that, but my view is just don't worry about it. It's not important.
It's very similar to an artist choosing their color palette and mixing the paint to achieve the color that they want to. We had a artist come in who was very skilled watercolor painter, and they were showing us a photo and then the picture that they had painted from it, and they were saying, this image is very difficult, trying to get this in the background to be the right exposure and this in the foreground and the colors and things. And I was saying, that's interesting that you worry that much. You've got artistic license. You can make the tractor red, blue, green, purple, rainbow colored for all anybody else cares.
Yep.
It doesn't really matter. And the darkness of the background is entirely up to you and what color you choose. It's really interesting to hear her point of view and desire to recreate with great accuracy the photograph that she was starting from.
And what I find interesting as a black and white photographer in this context as well is that I remember showing an image that I took up in Glencoe of the Buckeye even more, and I got up at 6 o'clock in the morning. It was October, I was there before the sun came up. The sun came up over my shoulder just as it came over the horizon. The mountain was a gorgeous sort of warm orangey pink, very, very warm color, and as you know, it's normally a sort of stone gray. And I took the photograph and I printed it, and I did virtually nothing to the color rendition of it at all. And people see that and they go, "Whoa, you've done that on Photoshop." and I haven't. It was natural. But I can process the hell out of a black and white photograph and nobody bats an eyelid. People don't say, oh, you've done that in Photoshop. It's just accepted. It's black and white. So therefore it's not reality. So who cares what you've done to it in Photoshop?
It's very interesting. And
very
also
very nice concept.
Perhaps illustrates people's lack of knowledge of tone and how black and white is created and the tonal range that's available and what actually happens in camera and the ability for you creatively to pull and push all of that range around to influence it in the way that you wish for people to interpret your choice of that image. So.
Yeah, well, that photograph I showed you of the Viking burial mound was probably the most extreme example I think I showed this evening. It got a hairstyle a bit like mine. Oh, better than mine. More hair than I've got.
Oh dear. The joys of working from home.
Yes, that's right.
It certainly does. And actually as well shows sometimes how you can take an image to another level by explaining it a little bit as well. So, I mean, as photographers, we always try and portray what we're trying to feel or experience sort of in the picture, and hopefully it'll stand up on its own. But it's nice to know sometimes that if you give a bit of, wording to it, or, whether it be a paraphrase, something that you read that can emphasize and sort of bring and elevate a picture to a greater level, as it were.
Yeah, I swing from one way to the other on that. I guess generally, I struggle with titles of images. Titles might come to me quickly, but I'm always reluctant to sort of make the titles too prominent. I'd be quite happy putting them in an exhibition with no titles and letting people come up with their own interpretation. But then there are other times when I think, well, it's okay. It's my representation. It's my interpretation of what's there. And if the title sort of leads you in that direction, well, so be it. So I try not to influence people too much. I like them to have their own reaction to it, to make up their. Again, another expression I use is I like my photographs to ask questions rather than provide answers. I want people to think about, even if at the end of it they say, well, I really don't like it. If it's made them think, at least it's got some sort of reaction.
Sure. Yeah. I suppose the greatest art is the one that creates a reaction.
Yeah.
Rather than just apathy. Quick question as well. Oh, hopefully quick for you. Do you ever shoot or capture your image or make your image based upon where you think you'll show it most often? I.e., if it's going to be on the wall, do you have a mind to what size it has to be printed versus, you mentioned you've got 4 books for sale on your website. Do you think about making an image for your book and perhaps providing an explanation of the image ever? Or
I'd have to say, 999 times out of 1,000, then no. I'm not thinking of anything else when I fire the shutter. You read all this advice in photographic magazines about, they always run make money from your camera feature, at least once a year. And it says, analyze the market and then take photographs that will sell in that market. And I've never done that. And to be honest, I know a lot of professional landscape photographers, and I don't know many who go out and shoot for a particular audience. What I tend to do is I take the photograph for me, and then I worry about who might buy it or how I might use it later on. That's I don't know. It's worked so far. I've still got a roof over my head, just about. So that's good. I haven't got anything on the walls, but that's okay. I've still got a roof above my head. I got a great quote about this that I've talked about before, from a lady she was a marketing consultant in America who dealt with artists, but primarily photographers. And she said, I'm often getting asked, I think this was an article on the Lexar, the card people on their website. And she said, I'm often getting asked by photographers, what should I photograph? What is going to sell? And she said, that just says to me they have no confidence in their own vision. And what she said is, you've got to believe in your own vision. Take the photographs you want to take in the way you want to take them, and then find an audience. And the great bit of the quote is something like, she said, I don't care if you want to take cross-processed insect porn, there will be a market for it somewhere. And I've never tried to take cross-processed insect porn, but if ever I get fed up with landscape photography, there's possibly a market there.
I suppose the
we are.
greatest.
I was going to say we're after the 9 o'clock watershed, but we're not.
We're not quite. I suppose the carry on to that comment or that quote is also that a lot of the greatest things that have been achieved in history are the things that people said wouldn't ever work, and people didn't know they wanted or needed until such time as it was provided. I suppose. Well, you only have to think about Apple as a brand, for instance, and all the things they've brought out, and people have been like, why would I want all of my songs in my pocket on some white box and stick it in my ears and ignore everybody else in the world? And you think, hang on a second, 10, 15 years later, that's exactly what everybody's doing.
And how many billions of pounds, or dollars? Yeah,
and we'll be thinking the same about electric cars. Oh, why would anybody want an electric car? And in 20, 30 years time, we'll probably all be driving around in electric cars and never even remembering the internal combustion engine. So I think
that's right.
The same is true of photography, that being, sounds a bit cringe, but being true to yourself and what you see in your mind every time you want to make an image and you arrive at a location, and whatever stands out to you or becomes what you make an image of, then you can't really go against that, can you? I don't think, or not with any great degree of satisfaction and genuine response to where you are.
Yeah, that's the important word, I think, important words, the genuine response. And again, I see this a lot in workshops. People photograph what they think they should take rather than what they want to take. And I had an experience a few years ago in a workshop in Venice with a lady who we'd been together for, I don't know, 4 days. I think it was a 5 or 6 day workshop. And I sometimes do, I hope this doesn't put people off coming on workshops with me, but I sometimes do what I call be unhelpful to be helpful. And we're in St. Mark's Square, and she said to me, what should I photograph? And so I go into nonchalant teenager mode, and I said, I don't care. What do you want to take a photograph of? And she said, oh, come on, you've been here hundreds of times. What are the iconic photographs? And I said, so you want the iconic shots? Yes, she said, full of excitement. And I said, well, I'll give you some advice. Sell your camera, go buy the postcards, because they've been done. You've got to come up with your own interpretation of St. Mark's Square. And I've do this myself, and I used it a lot on workshops. And I said to her, put your camera away, walk around, and if you had to describe St. Mark's Square to somebody who's not here today, what would your 3 words be? And she came up with big, busy, and people. And I was thereafter able to talk her through. So what are the photographic options to photograph big, busy, and people? And she came up with a photograph, as I said to her afterwards, that's your photograph. It's your take on St. Mark's Square. It's not something you could go and buy as a postcard. But we carry around all of these shoulds, oh, I should, I'm in Florence, so therefore I should photograph this, or I'm in Scotland on Skye and I should photograph this. And this is why the world ends up seeing clones of photographs that have been taken before.
Sometimes, just from my own personal experience, I've often taken the pictures I should take, apparently, just to scratch the itch and know that I've got those images.
Yeah,
and
get them out of the way.
Then I go and take all the images, or make all the images, or find the images that I think excite me and I respond to. And then I go back and I don't even look at the ones of the pictures I should take.
I was just about to ask you, do you ever process the photographs you've taken to scratch the itch?
No, the only times I can think I've done that are when I've been to places and I think I have to have the image. Well, have to is probably not the right word. But I want that image because it helps tell the story, and then I'm okay with it because I'm a great believer in telling the story visually. So like I went to America on a road trip, so being able to take pictures of those iconic places I went to gave me the opportunity to tell that story. So in 20, 30, 40 years time, when I look back on that, I can think, oh yeah, okay, I've got that iconic image, but also look at all these other images that I captured, and that continues to tell the story the way that I experienced it, rather than, you know, some Hollywood blockbuster film might tell that story. I suppose that something is almost being comfortable in what you see and what you want to see and what you want to make images of, rather than being somebody else's, like you said, a clone.
And sometimes, you know, it's a useful exercise, and I guess exercise is the right description, to go and take the, you know, put your tripod in the same tripod holes as everyone else as a way of warming up.
Sure.
And you know, I said this to a guy on a I was running a masterclass in Venice, and he said to me, seriously, because they're all experienced photographers, so I was really challenging them, and I said to them, you know, I want you to work on your theme or your project while you're here. And the guy said, oh, so you don't want me to take the photograph down the canal from the Academia Bridge? And I said, not particularly, no. And he said, really? You want me to come to Venice and not go home with that photograph? And I said, well, if you want to waste your time doing that, that's up to you. But where's the development in that? And then, you know, again, after I'd been unhelpful to be helpful, I said to him, if you want to go and take it one morning as a way of warming up, getting into the groove, you know, flexing, stretching your muscles, that's fine. Do it then. But what I would say to you is, don't spend a lot of mental space or time doing it. It's been done hundreds of times before. Find your own take on Venice. You know,
it's almost photographic trophy hunting, isn't it?
Yes, that's right. Yeah, people ticking the box.
It is. It's funny because we know when we run workshops that there'll be some people who want to achieve that one image, which is fine. If that's what makes them happy, then all power to them.
There's enjoyment in that ticking boxes.
Yeah, but equally, they're perhaps not going to be able to develop further than the same old.
Yeah, there's no growth in that. I think, you know, as somebody who you know is very interested in sort of people's photographic development, there's no growth in that. And also, I think it can be disappointing and frustrating. So many years ago, I was running a workshop with Joe Cornish at Fountains Abbey. And this lady came up to me. We'd been there about an hour and a half. And she came up to me and she said, this location isn't doing it for me. And I said, it's a World Heritage site. It's an 11th century abbey. You know, how can there not be something to photograph here? And she said, well, you know, I saw this photograph of Fountains Abbey with this dramatic warm lighting and a thundery, inky black sky behind it. And I wanted to get that. And I said, it's a grey overcast day. You're not going to get it. And I said to her, I've been back here hundreds of times and I've probably only ever seen it once or twice like that. And I said to her, you're just building yourself up for frustration and disappointment. Just clear your mind of that and respond to what you see. Leave all the preconceptions behind and just respond to what you see. It is what it is on this particular day. There will be photographs to be found, but not all the time you're carrying that mental barrier around that says it's not like X. I think she got there in the end, but you know, that was a big barrier for her to get over in her head.
Yeah, no, definitely.
And I wouldn't want to make it sound like, you know, here's Mr. Perfect preaching, because what I was advising her is it came out of years and years of frustration. You know, getting up, driving to the Lake District to go and photograph a sunrise, only to get there and there's no sunrise. So then I walk around for the rest of the day chuntering about what a waste of time. Why did I bother coming to the Lake District? And I don't get any photographs. And actually, there would have been hundreds of photographs to take if only I could have got all of that rubbish out of my head.
Sure.
Yeah, no, that's very true. And I think it shows that your development into, like, you know, people that, you know, come on your workshops and things like that, the development of pushing your photography further. So, you know, is really inspiring. So it's lovely to hear that. So, yeah,
thank you.
That's brilliant.
Thank you. Thanks.
Well, I think we're hitting the a fairly long mark here. So,
sorry guys.
No,
it's really interesting.
It's been awesome, and
I'm sure it has been for everybody else. So.
Thank you. I hope so. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thanks
no,
for
really,
thanks
really
for
has.
having me. Good to chat to you both.
We'll have to get you over here for a workshop once the dreaded situation has come to some sort of a close.
I'd love to come if you'll have me. Yeah, no, fantastic.
Oh, yeah, no,
I love you. I love your part of the world. Amazing. Yeah.
Consider yourself invited.
Thank you. Thank you. I'll leave the helicopter's pilot.
Yeah.
Earpiece at home.
Okay,
right, we'll
Steve,
just drop you off the screen briefly, and we'll say goodbye to everybody, and then we'll catch up.
I'll button push, Joel. Oh no, are you all right? You've still got a hand free, then, have you?
I have, just about.
No, that's brilliant. What an amazing conversation. Really got into it. Once again, another time, Joel, where we've forgotten that we're actually live.
Yeah.
We're thinking that we're just on a video call. Yeah. And and then I look at the time and I'm thinking, oh, we've done it again. So, but I think, well, hopefully everyone listening enjoys. I didn't see any comments saying when's this video going to end. Yeah. So
you two idiots, shut up.
Wow, that's another video when it's just us, Joel. So that's when we see those.
People are far too polite.
Yeah, indeed. Well, once again, thank you very much to Steve for coming on. It's been wonderful having him.
And a thank you to Olympus for making it possible.
Yes, we should probably mention Olympus at least once. We'll have Aidan on the phone tomorrow going, yes, you should have mentioned Olympus. Yeah, so Olympus. There we go.
Briefly as well, speaking about landscapes and getting out and about and going to find places to make images. We're running a workshop on the 12th of December with Gareth Morn, and the details are available on our Facebook. There's an event on there, which if you click on that, it'll take you through to our Eventbrite where you can buy tickets, and that's not this Saturday, Saturday after. So if you want some freedom and some photographic I'm not sure what the word is, some photographic delight, there we go. And get out with your camera and join some like-minded people, socially distanced of course, then book on and join us, because it'll be a great afternoon, evening of photography on Clanman Island in Anglesey.
And yes, if you're just tuning in now, so you're catching the back end of our live, but have no fear, you can rewatch any of the videos that we've done for the Winter Virtual Show. You can rewatch them at any time. Best place to go to see all the videos that we're posting is go to our website, which is cambrianphoto.co.uk. Click on the speakers and you'll see a whole list of all the videos that we've done, and also all the videos that are coming up, and you can set reminders on them as well. As always, once again, please make sure that you like and share this video. The more you do, the more it helps us spread the word about our winter show. Tomorrow, we have a lovely, fantastic day coming up. So in the we haven't got a morning one, so in the afternoon, we have...
you can keep watching Netflix in the morning, Paul.
Indeed. So we've got Nikon coming on, who'll be... Consta, talking about the Z series camera, and then evening we've got the great conversation between Paul Sanders and Jonathan Critchley. So please make sure that you join in for that tomorrow. Until then, we'll see you then. Bye-bye for now.
Bye now.